In this video, I'll be looking at some of the best and worst end-of-the-world movies that the 1950s had to offer. With that said, let's get into it. Fantasy, sci-fi, nostalgia, Rerun Zone. On the Beach, 1959. It's the end of the world, but instead of crazy explosions and fiery chaos, it's just quiet. An eerie, unsettling quiet. Like the calm before the storm, but the storm's already happened. Let me set the scene for you. It's Australia, right after some global nuclear event. The last pocket of civilization is clinging to hope as the radiation slowly creeps across the globe. It's a slow burn apocalypse, not instant devastation. That creeping dread that this is the end and there's nothing you can do about it. There's no action, no explosions, but that's what makes it so gripping. It's not about great special effects, but about how these characters deal with their impending deaths and their humanity in the face of utter hopelessness. It's a character-driven exploration of the psychological and emotional toll of an impending doom. And the cast actually pulls it off quite well. We've got Gregory Peck, who portrays this quiet strength and inner turmoil. Then, they cast Fred Astaire. Yes, that Fred Astaire, the king of song and dance, in a bleak end-of-the-world drama. I thought it was crazy at first, but then I saw it, and man, he really delivers a powerful, heartbreaking performance as a man coming to terms with the end of everything. It makes you wonder, how would you react? If you knew the clock was ticking with no way to stop it, how would you spend your last days? The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, 1959. It's 1959, and it's after the apocalypse, but it's not your typical end-of-the-world flick. Nope, this one is about what's left of humanity when everything else is already stripped away. We're in a desolate New York City, empty streets and crumbling buildings, and our main character, Ralph, is played by Harry Belafonte. He emerges from years trapped in a mine after a global disaster, expecting to find other survivors and some sign of life, but there's nothing left. This film captures that feeling of loneliness and isolation. Really makes you think about what makes life worth living when everything familiar is gone. But just when you think Ralph's destined to be alone forever, he bumps into Sarah, played by Inger Stevens. A glimmer of hope in all that despair. But remember, this is 1959. Ralph's black and Sarah's white. The film tackles the societal norms of the time head on, even in the apocalypse. Here they are, maybe the last two people on Earth, and race is still a massive barrier. The film was controversial at the time. Some critics praised it as bold and thought-provoking, confronting racism head-on, but others condemned it for even suggesting an interracial relationship. Then, just when you think things can't get any more complicated, here comes Mel Ferrer as Benson, another white man. Suddenly, it's not just about survival or even overcoming societal barriers. It's about the darker side of human nature and the desire for power and control. World Without End, 1956. The year is 1956, and it's right at the dawn of the space age. We're talking astronauts, time travel, nuclear fallout, and of course, what's a good sci-fi flick without some, shall we say, creative special effects? The special effects are definitely underwhelming, but we'll get to those a bit later. First, let me set the stage for you. There's a group of astronauts on a mission. They go off course and get flung into the far Earth's future. Earth is very different. Ravaged by nuclear war, the surface is a wasteland. Mutated creatures are roaming around the surface. There are other remnants of society huddled underground in shelters, trying to retain some sort of civilization. Then here come our time-traveling astronauts. They represent that classic 1950s we can overcome anything attitude. This is the atomic age, but it was also the jet age, with incredible technological advancements happening all around. Space travel was the next frontier, bursting with promise and full of hope. So these astronauts became symbols of that optimism, this idea that even if the worst happened, humanity could rebuild. Now, let's talk about those special effects. Let's just say things have come a long way since 1956. I mean, looking back, the creatures look pretty hokey, but you know, it's all part of the charm, right? That low-budget feeling makes World Without End this little time capsule of early sci-fi filmmaking. Even with those dated effects, it's still a bit of a cult classic. And don't forget, for a film about nuclear fallout and mutants, World Without End is a pretty fun, action-packed ride. 5. 1951. Now here's a different take on the end of the world. We follow 5 survivors in a world nearly wiped clean. No epic battles or vast wastelands. The whole film takes place in a single house. It forces you to think about what really matters when everything is gone. There are no Mad Max types in these 5 people, just a mix of individuals. There's Michael, the group's philosopher, pondering life's meaning. Then Roseanne, pregnant and clinging to hope for the future. Mr. Barnstable is a man trapped in the past, setting the table for 5 as if nothing's happened. Charles is the survivalist, ready to do whatever it takes, and lastly, Eric, a mountain climber who can't handle the apocalypse. The film's single house setting creates a claustrophobic atmosphere. Personalities clash, power struggles emerge, and simple actions like dividing food become moral battles. 5 holds up a mirror to us as humans and makes it far more unsettling than your standard action-packed apocalypse. As one of the earliest films to explore nuclear war's aftermath in a personal, philosophical way, 5 lingers with you, reminding us that sometimes the quietest stories have the loudest impact. Day the World Ended, 1955. This is a 1955 cult classic, directed by none other than Roger Corman. Set in the aftermath of a nuclear war that wipes out most of humanity, a small group of survivors find refuge in a lone, untouched valley. It's a classic apocalypse scenario, but with a twist only Corman could pull off. Here's our cast. You got Jim Madison and his daughter Louise. Then you got a geologist, a mobster, and a scientist, a real ragtag group. But surviving the fallout isn't their only problem. Mutated creatures are lurking nearby, adding a fresh layer of horror to the situation. Corman brings his signature blend of societal collapse and monster movie horror. Within their isolated valley, dangers emerge from both the outside and inside the group. Corman throws together personalities guaranteed to spark tension. The geologist who's hopeful about rebuilding, the mobster who embodies chaos, and the scientist who grapples with what survival means. And of course, there are the monsters. They're a bit rough around the edges by today's standards, but Corman did work wonders on a shoestring budget. Sometimes it's what we don't see that's the scariest, and this film leans into that, letting your imagination run wild about the threats beyond the valley. Good Will to Men, 1955. This next one is an animated short film directed by none other than William Hanna and Joseph Barbera. It's a sobering and poignant anti-war message and a remake of the 1939 classic Peace on Earth, which dealt with similar themes but was updated to reflect the atomic age anxieties. Produced by MGM, the film shows a world where humans have completely annihilated themselves through war, leaving only animals to inherit the Earth. In this grim future, a group of young animals gathers in the ruins of a church, where an elder recounts the tragic story of how mankind brought about its own destruction. The elder explains how humans continued to fight endless wars, leading to their ultimate extinction. The film uses stark and striking imagery to depict mankind's obsession with violence, including scenes of atomic explosions and devastated cities. Critically, the film was praised for its powerful storytelling and emotional depth. Hanna-Barbera, better known for their lighthearted animated series like Tom and Jerry, stepped into new territory with Good Will to Men. The animation was praised for its vivid and haunting visuals, particularly the scenes of ruined cities and the horrors of war, which were portrayed with surprising intensity for an animated film.
Robot Monster, 1953.
Ever heard of a movie so bad it's good? That's Robot Monster, a film some call one of the worst movies ever made, but it's achieved legendary cult status. I mean, think about it. A robot that looks like a gorilla wearing a diving helmet, and a budget that wouldn't cover groceries today. The year is 1953, and Earth has been ravaged by, what else? Aliens, of course. There are only 8 survivors left on the planet who are constantly on the run from Ro-Man, the robot monster. And yes, Roman is just a guy in a gorilla suit with a diving helmet. In true B-movie style, Robot Monster offers a ragtag group of survivors, forbidden romance, and family drama, all against a backdrop of out-of-place dinosaur footage. The movie's entire $16,000 budget led to some creative choices, including that costume. One unique aspect was the surprisingly decent 3D effects. Using dual-strip polarized 3D, they created an illusion of depth with two projectors, which was quite innovative for the time. And believe it or not, the film's music was composed by none other than Elmer Bernstein, the genius behind the Magnificent Seven and the Ten Commandments scores. Bernstein, who'd been blacklisted during the Hollywood Red Scare in the early 1950s, had to take on some smaller projects, like Robot Monster and Cat Women of the Moon, so he could continue working. Despite terrible reviews, Robot Monster was a box office success, grossing over $1 million, a whopping 60 times its budget. Today, where every blockbuster movie is all explosions and special effects, there's something refreshing about a film like Robot Monster. It reminds us that you don't need $1 zillion and the latest technology to tell a story, even if that story involves a guy in a gorilla suit with a fishbowl on his head battling aliens. A Short Vision, 1956. This next one is an experimental animated short from 1956 that captures the end of the world in a way that most feature films have trouble with. At first glance, it's just an old cartoon, but it has a haunting effect, and it's only 6 minutes long with no dialogue. It's all about the visuals here and the sound design. The premise? A mysterious object appears in the sky, slowly descending toward the earth. The subtlety is what makes it so unnerving. It's psychological for sure, messing with your mind. They let your imagination fill in the gaps, which is way more terrifying. At its core, this film is about fear of the unknown. It's not a feel-good 6-minute watch for sure, but it's a powerful one. Teenage Caveman, 1958. Grab your spear and get ready to explore the world of Teenage Caveman. It's a 1958 Roger Corman film that dives into way more than just caveman antics. The setup is straightforward. A tribe of cavemen living in fear of the monsters lurking beyond their territory. Our main character is a rebellious teenager, played by a young Robert Vaughn. Yes, before the Man from U.N.C.L.E. He questions everything, especially the tribe's rule about the forbidden river no one's supposed to cross. The real twist here is that it's not a caveman movie at all. It's actually set in the future after an apocalypse, where these cavemen are the descendants of humans after a nuclear war. The forbidden objects they stumble upon, like a doll or toy car, hint at a lost world, and suddenly, the tribe's fears take on whole new meaning. Vaughn's character isn't just a teenager sneaking out at night, he's questioning the foundations of society. He asks, what if there's more out there than just monsters? His curiosity challenges the tribe's entire way of life. It inspired later tales like Logan's Run, The Hunger Games, and countless other films that feature young people challenging a repressive system. Teenage Caveman reminds us that each of us has a bit of that rebellious teenage caveman spirit inside of us. When Worlds Collide, 1951. What would you do if you knew the world was coming to an end? That's the question asked by When Worlds Collide. This groundbreaking disaster sci-fi film was produced by George Pal and directed by Rudolph Maté. Based on the 1933 novel by Philip Wiley and Edwin Ballmer, the film tells us the story of Earth's imminent destruction by a rogue star named Belus. As the star approaches, scientists discover a potential refuge. Belus has a planet, Zyra, which has an Earth-like atmosphere. With limited time, a small group of scientists and wealthy benefactors hastily construct a spaceship to carry a select group of survivors to Zyra, functioning as a futuristic Noah's Ark. The film blends thrilling human drama with incredible special effects, particularly for the time they were made in. Scenes of tidal waves, earthquakes, and the spaceship's climatic launch helped the movie win the Academy Award for Best Special Effects. The visual design of the Space Ark was heavily influenced by the famed astronomical artist Chesley Bonestell, whose work brought a true sense of realism to the apocalyptic vision. The film's influence has inspired countless pictures, from Deep Impact to Armageddon. And while there was talk of a Steven Spielberg remake that never materialized, it's intriguing to imagine how When Worlds Collide might be adapted for today's world. When Worlds Collide was a defining entry in 1950s sci-fi. Its exploration of global catastrophe and human survival cements its status as a true sci-fi and end-of-the-world classic. The Lost Missile, 1958. This movie almost feels like a newsreel of something that hasn't quite happened yet, taking you just a little too close to home. You see, there's a missile that appears in the atmosphere, but no one knows where it came from or who's controlling it. The missile threatens the entire world, not any one nation. And there are no aliens or supervillains here. The enemy is technology itself. Dr. David Loring, played by a young Robert Loggia, leads the charge here to find the solution. Unlike the spectacle-driven films with big explosions and invading armies, The Lost Missile is all about building tension. With a low budget, they relied on stock footage and model work and built suspense through the missile's looming threat instead of flashy effects. The movie was a precursor to bigger budget films like Failsafe and The Day After, which tackled similar ideas with more sophisticated special effects. If you happen to stumble across The Last Missile, give it a watch. It's a fun, if somewhat cheesy, time capsule. The War of the Worlds, 1953. Now here's the granddaddy of end-of-the-world movies. The War of the Worlds is a sci-fi classic with its roots in an 1898 novel by English author H.G. Wells. The Earth is under attack from an alien force. Those Martian war machines with their Cobra-like design, heat rays, and force fields land right in 1950s California, making the threat all too real to American audiences. Now let's talk about those Martian war machines. Creepy and advanced, especially for 1953. Special effects supervisor Gordon Jennings used practical effects, like miniatures and matte paintings, to create an atmosphere of pure terror. And then there's the Technicolor process, which added intense vibrancy to the explosions and shimmering force fields. At the story's core, we have Dr. Clayton Forrester and Sylvia Van Buren, who guide us through all the chaos. The film focuses on the big picture, showing how small, personal concerns feel when faced with a civilization-ending threat. While this film doesn't end with the actual end of the world, it does fit well in this category, as it's clear from the beginning of the movie that the Martians didn't come to Earth in peace. They want to wipe out humanity and take the world for themselves. The War of the Worlds inspired a wave of alien invasion stories, and its impact is undeniable, earning it an Academy Award for Best Special Effects and a place in the National Film Registry. And then there's that ending. No spoilers here, but if you haven't seen this movie yet, what are you waiting for? It's an all-time classic. Now, if you enjoy classic TV, movies, and nostalgia, you're going to love it here at Rerun Zone. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on the way out. This is Rich from Rerun Zone. Good night.